So, Roger, through you, Mr. Chairman, and the meeting hasn't started. Okay, councillors, we'll make a start. It's 9:08 a.m. Attendance and apologies. I think we've got a full complement of member councillors. We welcome Councillor McDonald to Planning Committee. The confirmation of minutes are starred. We can leave them starred for the moment. Conflict of interest declarations. Councillor Gates.
Thank you very much, Chairman. On 6.6, I need to make a declaration. Council has appointed Place Design as a consultant in regard to the Southport PDA review, and I received donations from Place Design in 2011 and 14, and in 2016 the amount was refunded in full, but still counts. So I'm declaring that I received those funds, but I'm seeking permission to participate in making a decision about the matter. I've had no conversation with Place Design about this or any other matter this term, and am interested in the progress of the Southport Priority Development Area.
As we all are. Would someone like to move anything in relation to that? Councillor Peter Young.
Thanks, Chairman. I'm sure there's wording, fairly standard wording for this. I'm happy to move a procedural motion that Councillor Gates remain in the room for the debate and voting on the matter, because the conflict of interest is very remote, and Councillor's involvement in the decision is in the public interest.
Thank you.
Someone like to second that? Councillor Owen Jones. Take the vote. All in favour. Councillor Hamill, Councillor Owen Jones, Councillor Peter Young, Councillor Vorster, Councillor Pauline Young, Councillor O'Neill, Councillor Caldwell. Against, and Councillor Gates did not vote.
Just to finish that off, Councillor's involvement in the decision is in the public interest. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you.
And if we could unstar 6.6, that'd be great.
6.6, yeah. All right, Councillor Pauline Young.
Thank you, Chair. Item 6.3, the heritage overlay provisions. I have a declarable conflict of interest here. Old Burleigh Theatre Arcade or the Deluxe Theatre, as mentioned in the report 3 times. And in the past, I've made a declaration where my brother is the managing agent of the Old Burleigh Theatre Arcade and is still the managing agent, and so he will make a gain from that. So I'm going to actually leave the room as we discuss 6.3.
But we recognise the member for Burleigh standing.
Oh, well, there you go. That's how much respect I've got. Thank you.
Thank you. Appropriately, I think.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't understand. Even though you saved my bacon.
I let him in this morning when he pushed in front of me.
Did it merger action on off?
Well, it wasn't really merger action because technically you'd need to use your indicator to merge.
Okay, that's good. Any other conflicts of interest? No? All right, so we've got a number of starred items, so the confirmation minutes can remain starred. Councillor Vorster, 6.1, do you want to unstar that? Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. 6.2 for Councillor McDonald. 6.3 can remain. 6.4, 6.3 will unstar so that Councillor Pauline Young can disappear and then reappear. 6.4. Okay. 6.5. Okay.
So could I ask a question in regards to 6.5?
Yeah.
Is the Deluxe Theatre mentioned in there as well? Because doesn't it involve some of the heritage overlays? Oh, that was just from memory.
6.6.
So the
Sorry,
6.5.
6.5. I didn't think so, but we might be able to.
I thought that there was.
Maybe we'll just unstar that and double check before we get to it. 6.6, Councillor Gates unstarred, and 6.7 is already unstarred. That's a very unsuccessful list of starred items, councillors. So we've got the confirmation minutes and item 6.4.
Yeah, it's on page 228.
Okay, remains starred. So let's just deal with the starred items. Someone like to move those two? Moved by Councillor Owen Jones, seconded by Councillor O'Neill. All in favour? Against? Carried. All right, let's just go to 6.5.
So on page 228.
That's 6.3,
Is
not
it?
6.5.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
it?
So 6.5. Who, Catherine, or someone?
I can't see it on 6.5.
Predominantly, the only site-specific things are where there's an
Okay, sorry,
approval that's been taken up, of which
Sorry.
the theatre, I didn't see it in there, and it hasn't been acted on as yet.
Yeah. So apologies. Because of the way I'm in front of that.
Yeah.
But I had thought that it was.
So, yeah.
Correct, through the chair, the Deluxe Theatre isn't cited in the City Plan Minor Amendment 8. It is in relation to cadastral changes and also acting upon approvals that have occurred and realigning zonings where required. So as the chair said, given that the Deluxe Theatre approval has not occurred, we will not have undertaken a minor amendment for that.
Did we unstar 6.3?
We did.
Yeah, thank
Yes.
you, because I did have it.
Councillor Vorster.
Thank you very much, Mr Chairman, and I think Councillor Owen Jones has done us a service by allowing us to have this conversation, but I wonder whether we can get clarification between now and full council whether an exemption applies, because this is effectively adopting a change to the planning scheme. And in my view, notwithstanding the fact that the Burley Arcade might have been mentioned, it's an ordinary business matter.
Yes. And obviously the two limbs of it for me were whether it was even mentioned or relevant, and then secondly, I thought the same thing. But yeah. Maybe we should just check if on a broader scale for other items. Councillor Petillon.
Sorry, Chairman. On page 229, I noticed that there's a map that indicates or relates to the old jail at the old Nerang jail, which is at Nerang Country Paradise, Parklands, and I've previously declared a conflict in that I am a friend of the President and a member of the committee of the Country Paradise Association, at which site this is. I think the nexus is so slim that I am just opening it for any concern that councillors might have, but I hadn't even noticed it's in the text of the document.
Remote. Okay.
Thanks, Chair.
Councillors, should we move 6.5 so that the relevant officers can get on with their day? Someone like to move that? Moved by Councillor Vorster, seconded by Councillor Pauline Young. All in favour? Against? Carried. Remiss of me, sorry, at the outset not to welcome Nick Maguire, the Acting Director, for his first planning meeting. So welcome. Okay, 6.1. Councillor Vorster, did you want a presentation, or I don't think there's a need for. Everyone's pretty much across it. So, did you want to? Yeah. Yep, if you want to move it, I'll second it, if you want to speak to it.
Thank you very much, Mr Chairman. Today, Council has an opportunity, or Committee has an opportunity to endorse a proposal to deliver a supermarket in the heart of Varsity Lakes, an area that already has two smaller supermarkets, that being the IGA at Market Square and also the LD across what I hate is called the LD Bridge at Lake Orr. This particular development application garnered quite a significant amount of community interest that was driven by those who live closest to the proposed development, but also through the very motivated and I'm sure sincere advocacy of the operators of the IGA, a long-standing local business. Mr Chairman, having reviewed the submissions from residents and having met with the residents of Bellevue Drive, it struck me that many of the objections to the development didn't have a firm footing against the way in which development applications need to be assessed and the provisions of the planning scheme itself. So, for example, there was a suspicion in the community or an understanding that supermarkets would not be permitted in this a centre zone in Varsity Lakes if their GFA exceeded 1,500 square metres. And it was really important for me to work with those concerned residents to explain that the 1,500 square metres didn't relate to a limit, but rather a threshold that council applies to put an increased burden on the applicant to satisfy us that we would achieve a good development outcome and not an inferior development outcome. We also had submissions from the state government's property development business, QIC, who argued that a supermarket was simply not needed, which I found rather interesting given that QIC recently sold a block of land opposite Robina Town Centre that would deliver a new LD and who housed two Woolworths supermarkets in their own shopping centre. Mr Chairman, I acknowledge the commercial interests of the IGA and QIC, but I was most interested in what residents had to say. And residents expressed to me lots of concerns around amenity issues and the way in which the supermarket might impact the quiet enjoyment that they presently have in Varsity Lakes. City officers, I have to say, Mr Chairman, were absolutely sincere in their assessment of this development application. They didn't accept Coles at face value. They interrogated the original development application and insisted on some major changes to the way in which traffic would be routed around that development. But then also in response to resident submissions, a number of strengthened conditions were proposed to address the genuine community concerns specifically. And Mr Chairman, just for the benefit of those who might be listening in, I just want to document in some of the ways city officers have protected amenity while discharging their obligation to support development that's consistent with the planning scheme and the Planning Act. First of all, Mr Chairman, there was a concern about the potential noise impacts that this development would have on the residents of Bellevue Drive. And in response to those concerns and submissions, Mr Chairman, the new proposed conditions of approval will now limit the operating hours of the proposed development Monday through Saturday to between 7 a.m. and 9 p.m. and on Sunday 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. At the Liquorland, 9 to 9 and on Sunday 9 to 8. And the speciality tenancies, which I think there are 2 or 3 of, will operate only between 7 and 9. Mr Chairman, inside a centre zone, that is actually a very, very conservative set of operating hours, and I want to thank city officers for conditioning those in response to community feedback. Mr Chairman, there were also some concerns about the potential impact that lighting may have on nearby residents, and I'm happy to say that a lighting management strategy will need to be submitted to council and approved by city officers before Coles can carry out their land use. With respect to odour, Mr Chairman, there was some concern that the bins, the bulk bins at the lower ground closest to Bellevue Drive would cause an amenity issue for the residents at Bellevue Drive. I'm happy to report that the waste management plan identifies that all bulk bins associated with the supermarket will be emptied on a weekly basis, but that the bins will be stored in a dedicated bin room only. and that Coles will be working with Second Bite to divert organic waste from the site into more productive and social outcomes. So that should reduce any odour concerns, perhaps eliminating them altogether. Mr. Chairman, there were also concerns around the building and plant and the way in which that they may be screened. Residents didn't want an industrial facade greeting them as they stepped out of their front doors. Happy to report that one of the conditions of approval is that all of that plant effectively be recessed into the roof and completely screened from the street. I think that's a great outcome. And Coles have also undertaken to create quite a large public art installation on the facade as well to soften the look of the building. Safety is obviously a number one priority for us all, and we want to make sure that we're adhering to the highest SEPTED principles. And in response to resident concerns, there are conditions of approval that require the installation of mechanical surveillance, so that's CCTV, on both the retail level and the Undercroft area. And Mr. Chairman, vehicular access will also be restricted to the Undercroft area outside of the operating hours of the uses of the site. Now, Mr. Chairman, that's also a very good outcome for those residents on Bellevue Drive who were concerned about traffic in their street, because outside of operating hours, a boom gate or some other access control measure will prevent shoppers from accessing the site from Bellevue Drive. Instead, they'll be directed to Main Street. And that way, non-local traffic will be kept out of that street outside those operating hours. Mr. Chairman, delivery of this proposal will eliminate some on-street car parking spaces. And we know in Varsity Lakes, car parking is at an absolute premium. But what the development does do with the proposed conditions is deliver, I think, 169 car parking spaces under the Undercroft. And unlike the present development, the present use of the site, those car parking spaces will be publicly accessible. And while Coles have stated they have no plans to restrict public access to the car park, should in some distant future that become an operational need, the loss of the on-street car parking spaces will be addressed by publicly accessible car parking spaces forever protected on site. So there will be no net loss of public car parking despite any distant future change to the way in which car parking may be managed at the development. Mr. Chairman, I also spoke to some residents who are concerned that the character of Bellevue Drive may change and that there would be the removal of quite beautiful streetscaping and median gardens. I'm happy to report that that will not be the case. Access to the car park for customers and the servicing and loading area will be via 2 new crossovers, and customers and service vehicles will not be required to pass the southern boundary of the site. So that's the cul-de-sac at the end of Bellevue Drive where those gardens are. There will also be brand new street trees planted to embellish the road, softening it and greening it, which is really important to our community. Mr. Chairman, again, this was a very contentious development application. As I explained to residents, if council argued unreasonably for a refusal, this matter would be dealt with by the Planning and Environment Court, and we would have lost the opportunity to address the amenity concerns that were raised through submission. By supporting this development approval and making life, I don't want to say difficult, but by making Coles adhere to a very stringent and intentional set of development approval conditions, we can protect amenity while supporting, on balance, what is a reasonable development outcome. And lastly, Mr. Chairman, just on the issue of traffic, a lot of people worry about the amount of traffic through Varsity Lakes, which doesn't have a front door, right? People have to come through narrow streets in order to arrive in the CBD. In my view, and having spoken with city officers, while this development will induce traffic, on balance, it will probably reduce the impact on our local road network. And that is because if you live in this part of Varsity Lakes and need to go to a full-line supermarket, you are required to hop in a car and drive to Robina Town Centre, or drive to Treetops, or to drive to Kew Supercentre. So for the first time, residents in this part of Varsity Lakes may now drive, if they have to, a very short distance to a nearby supermarket. lifting a burden on the greater road network, and I think that's something that has to be acknowledged. The other thing that has to be acknowledged, Mr. Chairman, is that the current tenant of the current building, which is Mastery Schools Australia, anecdotally does not generate 60 vehicle trips per hour, but 250 vehicle trips per hour. So the 60 figure came from an initial traffic study. The anecdotal assessment by officers on site is that it induces 250. And it could be that this development, although at a slightly larger scale than what's presently there, might end up inducing less traffic simultaneously at any given time on site than what is already there. And in doing so, with the added benefit of additional pedestrian facilities, actually mitigate the risk of pedestrians coming into conflict with vehicles. Thank you for your indulgence. I thought it really important that I speak into a recording the concerns of residents and demonstrate to the community that we've addressed their concerns and supported a development that we're required to under the Planning Act and also the planning scheme. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone want to speak against? No, that's fine.
I'd just like to acknowledge Councillor Vorster's review of the development proposal and the evaluation of it, and welcome that. I also wanted to point out on page 69 of the report, there's the submitter maps, which are presented in a very different format than what we've normally had. I've had concerns about those submitted maps in the past where it's quite feasible to determine people's individual homes, and this, with the black backing, just gives a spatial distribution of the submitters and their responses, and I think that's a good step that the director has introduced. Thanks, Chairman.
Oh, look at you go, Nick, in week one. Okay, any other speakers for or against? Councillor Vorster, you happy to close?
Mr. Chairman, I'll just close by saying that one of my bugbears as a councillor since first elected is the proliferation of trolleys in lakes, on footpaths and what have you. I hate those. I hate them trolleys. Happy to say that Coles have acceded to the strong view of city officers and myself that we need to be.
The first ever trolleyless shopping centre.
Keep Forster out of the lake, that's what I say.
Classic. So I just wanted to do that and just close by saying thank you to the city officers who were really sincere about interrogating this development application. They didn't make it easy for Coles. That were on the side of residents at every step of the way. And we got great utility, Mr. Chairman, in actually meeting on site, walking through with the resident submissions in hand around the site discussing issues. And I think that gave the city officers an appreciation of the site and its context in Varsity that they would not otherwise have had. It wasn't of my asking, it's something that they voluntarily did. And if that's the way we approach contentious development applications moving forward, I think the public can have full confidence in our planning team. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Vorster. I understand they've also met with Councillor McDonald on site in relation to the next item as well, so new introduction from the officers to see their local councillor on site, which is good. So, all right, we'll take the vote. All in favour? Against? Carried. 6.2. Councillor McDonald, did you need a presentation or do you just want to talk to that? And you don't need to stand, even though Councillor Young set the benchmark very high this morning early. You can remain seated.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Look, I must thank the council officers for coming out on site, and I think that we could see firsthand the issues. We did have 15 objections in regards to this, or submissions, and the community are very concerned about this childcare centre. The first one that was approved, we had, how many children? There was 35 children in the first one, and this particular application is 51 children. The concerns that I raised were the traffic concerns. The officers have addressed this. Where it's located, it's right on a pedestrian crossing. It's right next to the Eleanora Primary School, which have around about 1,000 students. And there was concerns expressed to me by both the school and surrounding residents in regards to the added concern of traffic and the extra children in this area. With the next door neighbours, it's about the noise, because I know with the school they've been very accommodating with nearby residents to try and block out any of that noise. But with this childcare centre, we've got an outdoor area. I know the officers have moved the building over to the southern side, and the parking is on the area nearest to the residents. However, I would like to see if a councillor could support. Previously, we had the operating hours from 7:30 to 5:30. These operating hours are 6 a.m. to 7 p.m, Monday to Friday. And Mr Chair, I was just wondering if we could reduce those operating hours from 7:30 to 5:30, Monday to Friday, as were previously approved.
So can we just pull up where that is in the... in the conditions? This is the condition 9? Yeah. So, Councillor McDonald, I'm happy to move this, and if I have a seconder, then we can probably try and work to see if there's something that can be done. But my early inclination is that it's going to be extremely difficult, I think, to say that they should only start at 7:30 would be my current view. So can you just talk me through, in relation to A, B and C that are on the screen, can you just talk me through how you would prefer that it was configured in terms of time? So you're saying 7:30 till 5:30?
Yes, that was the hours that were approved in the previous application.
Okay. And then the outdoor areas?
Sorry, this is for the outdoor areas.
Okay.
Outdoor use.
Right, so the A you don't have a problem with?
No.
Okay, so we're just talking about B?
Play areas,
Okay.
to be used only between the hours of 7:30 and 5:30.
Okay, well, as the mover, I'm happy to adopt that in to be 7:30 to 5:30, and I think Councillor Vorse is there already, but are you happy with that? Second here. In reality, the way that the children all arrive, they generally aren't undertaking outdoor play within that first part of the arrival anyway, until there's a few kids there, and then they'll move out. So,
Look, on site, we did discuss about the noise, and I know the officers addressed the issues that I raised, and especially with the waste management, because it's going to be very difficult, for the collection, the noise, with the outdoor play area. But I'm sure that if we can change those times, that would go a long way of addressing some of the issues to the residents there.
Councillor Gates and Councillor Young.
Thank you. Just a question through you, Chairman. If the officers are aware of any noise complaints that have been lodged over recent times since the 35 children were on site?
That hasn't been.
Mr Chair, I'm not aware of any that we've received.
Okay.
I don't think it ever
That
commenced
hasn't been
use,
activated.
Councillor Gates. It's
It's
never
not-
been taken up.
No,
So
it's still a house.
it was, yeah, as Councillor McDonald said, if I recall, it was a house conversion type thing, and it hasn't been taken up, whereas this is
Yeah.
a specific built for the use.
So, yeah.
Did you have something, Councillor Young, or were you happy to?
thanks.
Yeah, Councillor Hamill?
Mr Chair, just interested on page 132 where it talks about car parking and it's talking about the proposed stackers that it suggests technical specifications have been provided for an example stacker system. So if I could just get clarity what that means, like is it locked in that they're going to use a stacker system and what one that is, or we've made a decision on the car parking based off a example stacker?
Take that one, Brownie.
Through you, Mr Chair, I can talk to that particular matter. There are 4 double stackers proposed for staff that you may see on the plan there that are at the rear of the site. We've got some detail from the actual manufacturer of that stacker. It's an independent stacker, so they'll be both able to be utilised independently. Officers had a little bit of concern with the safety aspects of having stackers around a childcare centre, and we probed them on a bit of that detail. I can report that the stackers will all have a turnkey operating system, so you actually need to be standing outside the stacker holding the key to move the platform. There's also sensors on the platform that are required, that will stop the platform moving immediately if there's any obstructions below or above, and an emergency stop button in case of any emergency event. So the stackers we've got are dedicated only for staff. They'll be signed as such and will not be permitted to be used by parents or visitors to the childcare centre.
Are the staff required to use it, or they could occupy other spaces, making a bit of a problem with car park utilisation?
They will be required to use those stackers and they'll be trained in the operation of such.
Thank you.
Could I just get clarity too, Mr Chair? So I noticed in the objections raised there was discussion about that it's going to lead to parents of the childcare centre using the school car park. That's actually fine because that's a public car park. It's not dedicated to the school, so is actually fine for those parents to use the car park next door at the front of the school to pick up their kids from the childcare centre. That's accurate?
I can confirm that is a public car park on road reserve land. While it probably is primarily for the school, it is not exclusively dedicated to the school, and it's a public car park available for all and sundry.
Thank you.
Just my only concern with the location of the stackers, and I assume this is right, Chris, is that the stacker that is actually under the building probably is what's leading it to have a very high first floor slab. Is that the case?
Might be able to talk to that one too, Chairman. The underside of the slab from natural ground level
You're like a politician, mate. It's almost impossible to get the microphone off you.
is 3.5 metres from ground level to the underside of that slab. We didn't change that. They didn't have any stackers initially as part of the development when it was first proposed. They had to increase the car parking supply to address officers' concerns. So they didn't have to change the height of that undercroft area, but you may see in the recommended conditions from officers that we had a bit of a concern with light spill and an amenity aspect of that, and we've recommended that they bring the apron down right around the edge of that undercroft area by 0.4 of a metre, 400 millimetres to improve that light spill, but it didn't affect the height of that first floor.
Because, councillors, I don't know if you've seen, but these buildings where there's a very high first level slab, in this illustration on page 128, you see a nice, neat, concrete, painted white slab. But of course, in reality, there's all manner of services that sit under that, and they look pretty horrific from the street. So if there's ever anything we can do to sleeve it or hide it, I think that should be done, because from a visual perspective, it doesn't do much for the area. So, yeah. Councillor McDonald?
Thank you, Mr Chair. Yes, on site, we discussed about the car parking and the access. I was very concerned about cars going in there and car parks being full and people backing out onto the road, or that they could be lined up, you know, going in to get the car parks. And with the conditions, you know, the officers said that they do have to come out forwards and not back out onto the road, which would be making it much safer. And with the car stackers, I'm certainly not a fan of car stackers. We hear so many stories now of car stackers breaking down. They can't get parks. People then park out on the road. And I think in a childcare centre, that is of a great concern to have car stackers there. With the lighting, I'm very pleased that the officers, when we met on site, it was raised about the lighting. I have an issue in 19th Avenue. If anyone drives down there overnight, the childcare centre that was approved by council opposite the Palm Beach State School, it's lit up like a Christmas tree, and it looks terrible. And it's causing problems with surrounding residents. So, you know, those issues certainly have been addressed, but the officers were very good in taking up the concerns that I raised in regards to the parking and some of the nuisance issues and some of the other issues that I raised. Thank you. By the way, that original application was a single-storey dwelling, and this particular application is a two-storey.
Right, anyone else want to speak for or against or have any discussion? Otherwise, we'll call debate closed. We'll take the vote. All in favour? Against? You for? Was that a delay? You're against? Yeah, we've changed the hours. Right, thank you. All right, 6.3, Councillor Young, if you want to depart. All right, councillors, so in relation to 6.3, did someone want to move that? The heritage overlay, moved by councillor Vorster. Yeah, seconded by councillor Owen-Jones. We'll take, no? Oh, you had a question too. I'll second it. We'll take questions. Councillor Gates.
I was hoping that the officers could give me what the implications are. On page 228 and also the one on the old rifle range, those areas that are shaded now as a local heritage place, what are the implications of that on any future development on either of those sites?
So sorry, just to clarify, page 228 is the Old Burleigh Theatre.
Correct.
And page 229 is the Nerang Police Lockup.
Sorry, 230, the Pimpama Rifle Range.
Pimpama Rifle Range, okay. So do you want to deal with those separately, one at a time?
Yeah, sure. So through the chair, Councillor Gates, you're referring to the purple hatching around?
Well, both colours,
Yeah.
and what does it? What are the
Yes.
implications of them now being a local heritage place?
Yes. Those 9 places were entered on the heritage, the Gold Coast Local Heritage Register in 2018.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah,
But
so
what does it mean for any future potential development of that site?
Yeah, depending on the type of the development application, where it's mapped in the purple hatching, that's classified as a place in proximity to a local heritage place. So whether an application will be required in the future will depend on the nature of the proposal. The gold area is the actual place that's mapped as the local heritage place. and the same thing applies. It will depend on the type of proposal over that mapped area, and that will depend then on what level of assessment it will be in the future.
So can we just clarify,
So-
does it effectively get called up as an overlay?
Yes.
And then if it's called up in the overlay, what's the next step?
Yep. Again, it depends on the nature of the proposal. So
Okay.
depending on whether that particular facility is a council-owned facility, so it would depend on the type of the development, which is unknown. But depending on the type of development, you go to the tables of assessment, which will then determine whether it's a code accessible or an impact accessible application, or if there's no impact on the cultural heritage significance of the place by the proposal, there is also the potential to go through a heritage exemption certificate process, which is allowed for under Section 74 of the Queensland Heritage Act. So again, it depends on the type of the proposal and therefore the development trigger.
So, for example, the Burleigh Theatre, we all have lived the experience on that journey over the last few years. The is it Heritage Management Plan or whatever it's called, I can't think of the Conservation
Management Plan.
Management
yes.
Plan. It's expected, say, in relation to that one, that the development occurs consistent with that plan. In relation to the rifle range, I'm not familiar with the Conservation Management Plan for the rifle range. What do you remember offhand what it says about what could or couldn't happen?
Yeah, through the chair, there is no conservation management plan yet for the Pimpamar rifle range.
Right.
It's been assessed as meeting the heritage thresholds as per the criteria in the Gold Coast Local Heritage Register. So off the top of my head, I can't recite the reasons for the listing, but we're quite happy to provide Councillor Gates with the heritage criteria that site met to become listed
I
in
don't
2018.
quite understand that one. To my knowledge, there's nothing there. It's just a former site. And so, I mean, I know we adopted it, but I've never had a great understanding of this. I know we're required by the state to have a heritage register, but it really concerns me that this limits opportunity for, this is the South Coast Restoration Society site. And it just concerns me. And also with the Deluxe Theatre, I thought that we, or the council, not me, the council tried to protect the facade only, not the whole. I don't know why
as I said,
these.
basically it gets called up under an overlay, and when you then look into the detail of the Conservation Management Plan, that's specifically to the Old Burleigh Theatre, the elements that are of heritage protection predominantly are the facade and a few other bits.
Chairman, just to offer a practical example, with page 229, which is the old Nerang lock-up, which is at Country Paradise, since that was determined some years ago, Council went ahead and built the adventure playground just immediately adjacent to this, and the only restriction was that the fencing for the construction had to be carefully located so as not to impact upon the heritage values of the building, and it really had no practical limitation or imposition on what we went ahead and did. And I'm sure that would differ from site to site, but that's just an example of how it panned out.
Thank you. Well, perhaps, Chairman, the officers can just tell me what the heritage values are of this rifle range that we have included. It's too late because
I suspect that there was 14 generations of Hamills have been there and shot a gun or something. Is that the case?
They were actually German, so.
Well, that's pretty awkward. Okay.
Anyway.
Hamill, now, I assume this is in your area in Division 1 now.
Mr Chairman, it is, and I have to admit, it's the first time I was even aware that there was something proposed at Heritage Park. I'm aware there was a rifle range there, but possibly unless one of the very, very old trees has got a bullet hole in it somewhere, I'm not aware of any other physical attribute.
So if perhaps we could, yes, Jemima, do you want to say something?
Through the chair, I've just pulled up the statements of significance, which is on our website. It meets several criterion, but basically it's a document that's 7 pages long that talks about the elements that are of significance. But it talks about the criterion that it meets is heritage importance, rarity, potential information and class characteristics. So I'll just see if I can pull out a few items in there. So it's about where its importance lies. So it's basically, it was important in terms of it, the type of facility provided by the Defence Force under the Defence Act and later the Commonwealth Defence Acts for the use of local rifle clubs and subsequent training of volunteer rifle companies. They're important for the defence of Australia and government. It's rare. It has a rare surviving example of the type of rifle ranges established on the Gold Coast from the mid-1880s onwards. The remnants of the rifle range demonstrate the evolution of ranges and their community use through the 2 world wars. And the former Pimpama rifle range area, including the target structures, earth mounds, firing lines, associated corrugated iron sheds and material contained in the sheds have the potential to yield information pertaining to the layout, use and development of the Defence Force controlled rifle ranges on the Gold Coast. The site also has archaeological potential when combined with associated documentary evidence allows for further research into the early use of rifle range sites. So that's just a couple of quick extracts from our statements of significance on the website.
All right, so there's 2 things that strike me.
In that case,
the first thing is that the place is called Heritage Park, so we might need to rename it Park. And also Rifle Range Road, I assume, is in the nearby proximity, which was obviously named after this as well. So we might need to look at it more holistically. Councillor Owen Jones.
Thank you. On page 231, we have the proposed update of the map for the Broadwater Parklands, and my understanding is that the city, when we did the Broadwater Parklands, we relocated the cenotaph and the memorial, the marble stones from the memorial. So I'm surprised that we have so much of that area marked as orange when I would have thought that the 2 bits that should be marked as orange is the small area that actually has the actual monuments, and then the balance of the area should be the purple, which is ultimately the place of the sightlines. And then I'm also surprised that in the same map we don't actually identify in orange and purple the existing columns that are still up near the aquatic centre, which was actually the original bits of heritage. Does that make sense?
Through the chair, I might just point out that these maps have now been identical to this for 4 years.
Okay, but this talks about a proposed update in August 2022, which is now.
Yeah, that, through the chair, that heading got added to this whole map, but nothing had actually changed in that mapping since the resolution from 15th of March 2022. Through the chair, the only thing we could do is take it on notice that Councillor Owen Jones would like that particular site potentially re-examined. But at this point in time, it's in your Gold Coast Local Heritage Register, and all this process is doing is mirroring the listing into the Heritage Overlay map.
So I would have thought our job is to make sure things are accurate. So if it is improperly described, because the challenge that we have is we're just about to place or formalise an overlay over a piece of City of Gold Coast property, which actually doesn't reflect the heritage nature. So, but we're going to do it because we say that that's what the plan said for the last 4 years. So if it's wrong, it's wrong. Time doesn't make it right. So anyway, I won't be supporting the motion, Mr Chair.
Chairman, I just need to point out the concerns I have about our heritage mapping. My understanding, I was approached by TSS about a year ago, and the old cable park equipment was moved from Main Beach, and TSS took it as an act of kindness to relocate it within their school grounds. And even though they relocated it from Main Beach out of Cable Park, they then wanted to expand the school, and because it was there, it was protected in that location and they weren't permitted to move it. It makes no sense that those provisions exist over our heritage overlay provisions. I have no understanding how that can be. If it was able to be moved before we had these provisions, it was able to be moved from Cable Park for the future development of Cable Park. It was taken as a goodwill gesture by TSS and put within their school grounds, and then when they wanted to expand their footprint and it was not in the right location for their purposes, they were not allowed to move it because it was protected under these regulations. So I don't know what the ultimate outcome was. I just know that it's problematic, and I don't have an understanding or as thorough an understanding of what this means by putting this now on public consult to formalise it within city plan, and I'm not comfortable with it.
Nick?
Through you, Mr Chair, just quickly, and perhaps the officers can clarify this for me as well, but just to address Councillor Owen-Jones' comment as well, is that if there are new sites that need to be added to the Heritage Register, that's something that we can always look at and add additional sites to the Heritage Register. But I think also, just to clarify, the process that we're going through today is seeking your endorsement of the changes that were made based on the feedback that we got from the state previously, so that we can go out to consultation before we come back to you with the final version of this work at some stage down the track. So this will then go out to consultation before you then endorse a future report, consider a future report around the heritage overlays provisions down the track. So I think that's the main point of what the report is about today.
Mr Chair, but isn't the main issue of what we're dealing with today is actually heritage and heritage overlay? And so in the example that I have described, which is the South Fort Memorial, it was moved by the City of Gold Coast when we created the Broadwater Parklands, and the actual heritage, part of the heritage, is where it originally was, which is up on the top of the hill, adjacent to the aquatic centre where the plinths still stand. So I think that we've got it wrong, you know, so, and I don't, we shouldn't put it out for public consultation if it's wrong, and we shouldn't endorse it today if it's wrong, and I don't care what happened 4 years ago, because it's wrong.
Okay. I mean, it's all probably a little bit subjective, because some people would say that having the broader protection is a positive, you know what I mean? So can I just ask, if we were to propose a mapping change, as Councillor Owen-Jones has suggested today, is there a mechanism of doing that between now and full council, before it goes out to public ad, that could facilitate that change?
Through the chair, we'll have to take that on notice. Considering that we're in state interest review, we'll just have to see how we can accommodate any changes in this period. Yep.
Councillor O'Neill.
Thanks, Chair. Just some clarity, page 239 and page 240, it's all about the trees, and we've increased the actual overlay for the Powell Brothers Community Tree, which is all the length of Garrick Street there. Is that to cover the growing canopy? Because I noticed, which is the fig tree in Tugun, we systematically, you know, have to prune that tree because there are power lines and things like that. So I guess that's been taken into consideration. Is that the reason that the overlay has been increased for the canopy of the trees?
Through the chair, these mapping changes reflect exactly what the area of protection is in the Gold Coast Local Heritage Register.
But I'm saying
the
it because it's
specific question
increased
is
in
that-
Garrick
So
Street.
the mapping was incorrect. It didn't, the mapping that says the current version of the mapping, that mapping does not reflect the full area for protection that is documented in the local heritage register. So therefore the mapping change to reflect that broader, the wider area of gold is to now identically match the area for protection in the Gold Coast Heritage Register.
So it's actually, the left-hand map on page 239 is not correct.
Too slender.
Yeah,
Yes, it doesn't match the local heritage register area for protection through the heritage assessment.
Okay, but are you talking about it doesn't match the description of what needs to be protected?
Through the chair, correct.
Okay. And does that illustration on the left-hand image there, is it reflected, is it actually contained anywhere within the local heritage register?
The local heritage register has what's called an area for protection, and it's in words only. It's not in a spatial layer.
So going back to Councillor Owen Jones's point, if we adopted this in words only in 2018, then it would appear to be the case that the current version of the mapping is something that's been more recently created to reflect the wording.
Correct.
So the only inherent problem we've got is the fact that we've been to a state interest check with that mapping, but in all other respects, it's a creation for the purposes of putting it into the scheme.
Correct.
Was not currently mapped. And nor, I just have a gut feel, and I'll leave it to the divisional councillor, but I think the area that has been identified when there's nothing there, I mean, I respect the heritage of the site and that it is Heritage Park and that it is Rifle Range Road, but to map it to that extent, I have no understanding of how we got from not mapping it because it was former. We're not actually protecting something. We're identifying it, but why does
I think with the rifle range, it's not in the scheme at the moment. That's right, it's a new entry. So that's why the left-hand image says there's no map.
No, I think
So
this was...
where it's up to in the process is that it's been identified, there's no conservation management plan, but we are proposing a map to go into the scheme.
Okay, how about that?
Is that correct?
Through the chair, Pimpama Rifle Range was one of 9 places added to the local heritage register in 2018. All this is doing is, as Kate suggested, is matching the mapping to the words that are in the local heritage register.
Yeah. So,
And I guess
correct me
that's
if
why
I'm
we're
wrong,
indicating concern.
did we endorse these actual images previously?
No, not the images.
The images?
Through the chair 3 times.
We've endorsed this same set of images 3 times.
Yeah, don't
Correct.
you recall seeing it? There's
There
definitely been before us.
Yeah, we're talking about details here that I can't remember whether we were then talking about cutting the Southport thing in half, for example. I don't remember that level of detail.
So, Chair, you've all seen them now on the 27th of October 2020, on the 3rd of March this year, on the 15th of March this year, and when they originally when the original resolution happened in 2018 to add them to the Gold Coast Local Heritage Register. So this is the 4th time that they've actually now been back to with.
Okay, so
in the
if it's the
identical manner
case
with
that
no changes.
out of the public advertising process, there's changes that are suggested, we then would potentially make those changes and go back to the state with them?
Through the chair, we'll have to take that on notice and understand how we can make changes at this current period of time.
Okay, so I think it's probably just worthwhile hearing what the thoughts are up in Pimpama in particular, and maybe Southport as well, that there may be the need to make some changes. So if we can get across that between now and full council, I think that would be helpful. Mm-hmm. And if any of that information can be circulated in advance, I think that would also be helpful. Councillor Owen Jones,
So through you to the chair, just to the officers in our heritage section, are you happy with the fact that the original columns at Southport aren't mapped as heritage, being able to be heritage protected?
Through the chair, I'll have to take that on notice. I have to look into detail around the Southport War Memorial and the statements of significance around that.
Yeah,
So, I mean, I think, to me, that's exactly the sort of thing that should be fleshed out, that they can be added. I don't know whether they can fall into the same item or whether they need to be separately listed or something, but, like, there's no reason we can't fix that.
Yeah, because at the moment, we're technically, you know, that if they're not mapped, they can get bowled over, but the new ones that were built in 2018 that we've seen 4 times can be saved.
Yeah.
It's great.
Councillor Vorster, my apologies for skipping you.
No, that's all right. Just some rapid fire questions concerning some specific sites. The first one is on page 250, and just relates to Rosser House and Gardens. So obviously that's at our Botanic Gardens. Have our heritage team, through you, Mr. Chairman, worked with the city officers who are responsible for the planning for the new facility? I suppose, have you been working together to ensure that we're respecting those cultural and heritage values?
Through the chair, yes, we have been working closely with Parks and Recreation on the greater Gardens master plan.
Great, thank you. And on 252, we've got mapped the Merrimack Drains historic landscape, which I'm taking to be the site of the proposed Green Heart. The heritage there, does it relate mostly to the Indigenous ochre sites that have been surveyed on the site? Or is there a greater context we need to be aware of? I'm just, I suppose, sensitive to the fact that it's a big 270 hectare swathe, and want to make sure we're not fettering unnecessarily our ability to deliver the master plan that we've endorsed.
Through the chair, I'm just looking that up on our local heritage register.
And just while you're doing that, I suppose one of the things that gives me a little bit of pause is that the mapping shows the, I suppose the southeastern boundary of the site running from its most southern point eastward, following the Mudgeeraba Creek. But in the master plan that we've endorsed, we propose basically a complete realignment of the Mudgeeraba Creek, bringing it back to its pre-pastoral state. So I'm just interested in how the mapping may impact our ability to deliver the restoration of the Mudgeeraba Creek, which is quite different from the line that it follows in the overlay. So.
Through the chair, Councillor Vorster, I believe it will depend on the level of assessment, whether it's a code assessable application or an impact assessable application for Green Heart in the future. But the heritage identification of that site is purely in relation to the historic drains through the site. There's no mention in the listing of the Indigenous.
So Mr. Chairman, when we talk about historic drains, are we talking about, like, you know, turn of the century culverts? Are we talking about overland flow paths?
Through the chair, Councillor Vorster, could we furnish you with the actual report that led to the original listing of this site?
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you for that kind offer through you. I'd love to have that report. I suppose we've endorsed a master plan that foreshadows significant re-engineering of the overland flow paths into new billabongs, new creeks, new wetlands, and I'd be extremely hesitant actually to tick off on something that isn't drain specific, but rather applies to the whole site, because it could encumber our ability to make the space more functional. And I'm not saying we shouldn't be protecting things like ochre sites with Indigenous value, protecting the heritage of the Mudgeeraba Creek, tick, tick, tick. But as far as delivering a developed outcome on the site, I'm very hesitant to support a historic drainage plan without that information, so that'd be great. And those are my only ones. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So just wanted to ask a question. Is it the case actually Councillor Owen-Jones, that on page 223, the Anzac Park Memorial gates that are depicted there as a new entry are in fact those ones. It appears to be Marine Parade. Can someone confirm whether that's Southport?
So through the chair, did you say page 231?
223.
223. Through the chair, I presume that is the same site that Councillor Owen-Jones is referring to.
There you go, fixed. Already in. So that was point number one. Point number two, so Councillor Vorster, the historic drains are obviously not a new entry, they're an existing entry. Now, I can't remember having seen a reference to that in any of the material that we've seen in relation to Greenheart.
Although it's a Division 8 site, now I've got a keen interest in that particular precinct, and the thing that makes me nervous is the rest of the mapping is quite surgical. So we're looking at specific tracts of land, connections and what have you. But this applies over the whole site, and it would seem quite odd that the heritage value extends only to our property boundaries and not into the adjacent golf course, for example. I can't ever recall seeing the maps or that detail, so I'd be very keen, Mr Chairman, to review that between now and full council.
Yeah, through the chair, Councillor Vorster, the mapping reflects the area for protection that's noted in the Gold Coast Local Heritage Register. So in the instance of that particular site, it will be probably those 3 cadastral lots. So unless there had been a significant sort of heritage analysis in between that time to change the Gold Coast Heritage Register area for protection, or this process is just reflecting what's already in the register. So I guess, yes, we could take it on notice to see what's possible, but in terms of the Greenheart Master Plan, I suppose it depended on what came through to you from the Lifestyle and Community Directorate, because I don't recall that our team has ever had anything to do with the Greenheart Master Plan process.
Yes.
And sorry, just to finish, I guess the heritage overlay is no different to any of the other overlays that would apply to the site, whether it's an environmental significance overlay, wetlands overlay, biodiversity overlay. Obviously the site would have lots of other overlay mapping applying to it.
I'm sure it would, but I presume that many sites in this big long list are both public and private property. And I would think that if something's of genuine heritage value, that we wouldn't treat private property any differently to the way we would treat public property. So when I see an overlay map that follows a lot line, I get a little bit nervous that we've probably either cast the net too wide within our own property, or we've cast it too narrow, simply not to have the inconvenience of dealing with adjacent property owners. It's just, it's too convenient, for lack of a better word. So I'd be very interested in that document to identify specifically what has triggered inclusion here, and if it deals with the flow of surface water through degraded former pastoral land along a creek that's been re-engineered into a canal, I'd really want to be teasing out the merits of that listing and the extent of the mapping, because last thing I want to do is fetter the delivery of a project whose master plan we've endorsed that we're actively seeking funding for through the state government.
Councillor Gates and Councillor Hamill.
Thanks, Chairman. If I could just ask one more question. On pages 244 and 245, 244 lists the Pimpama Ormo War Memorial, although the land is not highlighted, it's just mentioned. And the same with on 245, the Upper Coomera War Memorial is, the words are there, but there's no area of place highlighted. Why is that? And yet, if you look at Rifle Range now, there is a block that, is it because they were adopted earlier.
It's too small to.
It's too small. I think there's actually a dot.
So what is, where I'm heading with this is to find out if there's no, why isn't there near a place mapped around those? Why isn't there a purple map for those, or have we seen that previously too?
Through the chair, yes, you've seen all of this before, but the only way I can reiterate this is the mapping just reflects what's in the local heritage register area for protection, which is done through the heritage threshold analysis.
So how does that impact on the state government's desire to relocate the Upper Kumara War Memorial, which they have suggested they need to do due to the widening of the Tamborine-Oxenford Road? And they're the sort of things I'm asking when I say what are the implications of what we're adopting.
So,
I know
Councillor
it's for
Gates.
public ad, but...
No, but this one's not a new entry.
No,
it's already there.
I understand that,
Yeah.
but the opportunity just arises to find out what the implications are of our heritage register over that site, for example.
Through the chair, I'm not familiar with the site and the example, the specific DA example that Councillor Gates is referring to, but again, we could just take that on notice because I suppose the nature of this amendment is not to interrogate specific development applications, it's to deal with the amendment as it stands
There is no
in the
development
statutory process.
No, it's not a development application. It's a potential state government roadworks project that Councillor Gates is talking about. So,
Well, there's the provision of Section 74 of the Queensland Heritage Act that outlines a process for heritage exemption certificates in the instance of particular works that have a no detrimental impact on the cultural heritage significance of the place. So again, we can only take that on notice. To the best of my knowledge, we haven't been contacted by anybody in the state government about that, but we can take that on notice and respond to Councillor Gates about that project if it has come across our desks, which we're not aware
it
of.
seems to me, just as a general proposition, the current proposals for mapping are more refined than some of the earlier entries. So with the exemption of perhaps the dot that might be sitting on the War Memorial, there's clearly a lot more cadastral entries that have been previously put in than might be the case under the current approach, which is clearly, even if we think they might be too big or something, they're still far more refined than, for example, like the entire beachfront at Burleigh. That's a huge area. So, Councillor Hamill, then I'll go to the Director.
I'm interested, Mr Chair, just in terms of process. So this is only to allow it to go out to public ad and then it will come back to us for final endorsement, that's correct?
Yes, eventually, yeah.
Yep. And if it doesn't receive final endorsement from council, what happens then?
It would probably never commence.
Yep.
But I'd have to get some advice on
Yeah, through the chair, I guess the timing risk of the protracted length of time, the risk to us is the temporary local planning instrument for the Old Burleigh Theatre Arcade expires on the 30th of June in 2023. So there would then therefore be a gap in time when that TLPI no longer has effect over that particular site, which means therefore a new application could be lodged with no protection over that site. So to some degree, time is really of the essence in terms of that as a key driver for why this amendment package even started.
Does that help?
It does. And second question, in terms, so it goes out to public ad now, and if there was legitimate feedback or support from the community to remove something from the local heritage register, can that be excised before this is completely signed off, or would that have to be done through another amendment later on?
Through the chair, there is an application process to ask for removal of a place from the local heritage register. So we'd have to take that through that particular consultation process.
But this is only to bring the local heritage register into the scheme. So you could, in my view, potentially have something that's sitting on the local heritage register like they are now that isn't brought into the scheme, couldn't you? I mean, ideally, it's not how you want to have
we
it.
could, but it's not standard local government process.
So if, for example, the feedback is the rifle range is not what we think it is, we don't want to go into the scheme at the moment. We want to re-evaluate its local heritage value with a view to potentially removing it. Could that be achieved?
Through the chair, I'm going to defer to Anne McKenzie to give you further detail on that. Thank you.
Through the chair. Just to confirm, so all of the places that we're talking about today have been formally assessed and it's been confirmed that they do meet the relevant threshold criteria for a place of local heritage significance. So I think that's just probably a first point to be made. And also, under the Queensland Heritage Act, a local government must enter places that are identified as having local heritage significance into their relevant planning scheme. But if I can also make the point too, I do take it on notice that we could look to examine, I guess, some of these areas that have been brought up to date. The current boundaries that we're looking at are based on the formal assessment, so it has been confirmed that those areas are areas of significance, but we can certainly, I guess, in consultation with yourselves, have a look at each of those places.
I'd be happy with that, Chair, because the map is only 2 colours on it, but I'm going to guess there's intent that, say, for example, at Heritage Park, if the South Coast Restoration Society wanted to build another building maybe 50 metres away from the purple, that could still trigger the need for them to have to get assessment done to prove how it doesn't cause an effect, or is it only that if it...
Only if it touches the mapped area.
Check. Is that accurate? Yeah.
Through the chair, can I also make the point too? So this doesn't prohibit development on a local heritage place. It just means that the development is managed to minimise the impact. And there are different levels of, I guess, impact that would be considered. So for works that are only minor in nature, it would be undertaken through a heritage exemption certificate process, which is a very efficient process. It acknowledges that some development works are low impact in nature and that we just ensure there are appropriate conditions in place to minimise those impacts.
Just to clarify, my bigger concern isn't Rifle Range Road site, it's actually the upcoming site to do with the Stewart's farm, that there is work being done in that space, and that they're the same lot of questions being asked, I think, by a lot of officers from different areas, is what impact heritage listing on aspects of the Stewart's property will have, because it was purchased for a price this sum for a reason, and concerns about restrictions that heritage listing brings, which I support the heritage listing, but understanding that, as Councillor Gates keeps making the point, the practical implications on a site-by-site basis is a little bit difficult to comprehend. And all we're looking to avoid is in the future that something that we support wanting to do can't be done because we've endorsed, apparently for the 3rd or 4th or 5th or who knows how many times, to it, just to make that point.
So just in relation to, say, Stewart's Road, is it open to council to identify that there's heritage value, but then not to enter it into the local register?
Through the chair. Under the legislation, council's required to have regard for the heritage significance in the decision-making process.
Yes.
And the legislation does clearly state that local governments must identify places of local heritage significance and have regard for that in their planning scheme. Just in relation to Stewart's Road, just to confirm, so Stewart's Road isn't actually on the local heritage register. It's been identified as a place of potential significance. So that's one place that we're still yet to formally assess.
So it's a great practical example of that. If the house is identified to have heritage significance and then ends up on the local heritage register, does that then mean that the house couldn't be moved 50 metres to the right to allow a sport field to be built? That's the practical implications, that because they're all very different sites with different practical results, but that...
Which is why you then need to look into the conservation management plan. So, for example, this stuff here, there's a whole foreshore at Burleigh that's mapped to protect the pine trees, But I mean, we continuously put a new bin storage facility in the same proximity. So presumably the detail that lies underneath the map is able to identify, well, we're trying to protect the trees. You can put a bin there. That's cool. You know what I mean? Like the house, that we're probably too far away from knowing what the conservation management plan for a house on Stewart's farm would be.
It was just an easy to understand example, I think, of where some of my colleagues are coming from.
Can I say that having seen where the Greenheart thing has now ended up and that level of mapping, it is something where you might want to back the truck up a little bit on how quickly that moves forward to ensure that whatever the global vision is for Stewart's Road could perhaps be meshed in with what we want to achieve with the farmhouse before the farmhouse takes over.
Through the chair, with Stewart's Road, we are in consultation with Parks and Recreation at the moment for any of their master planning works that they're currently looking at as well. So just to, they're obviously aware of the situation and we're also in consultation with them.
Okay, that's good.
Can I also add through the chair too? So we do relocate heritage places, so it is a potential that could be considered, but it would need to be considered on balance of, I guess, all considerations about whether or not we can accommodate it with the existing arrangement and the proposal for that site, or whether we look to relocate it as you've suggested. Yeah, so it all gets considered.
So can I just ask, how did the Stewart's Road property come onto the radar as a potential place of significance? Say that again. Petitioned by residents. Was it?
You voted for it?
Yeah, to accept the petition. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, so
no dramas with that. I just couldn't remember.
Yeah, so it hasn't. I've had a couple of briefings on it, and there's work being done, and I think there's early indications that it does have some architectural significance and has other historical significance to that end of the Gold Coast. It was just more that it's a good example on city-owned land of the implications of gold and purple on a map, which is a physical structure versus at rifle range where, like, if the old mounds were still there from when it was a rifle range, I could understand the need to protect, but as far as I'm aware, they were bulldozed a long time ago. Like, it's more that, and maybe I just need to get a meeting on site with Councillor Gates and officers at Rifle Range
actually,
Road.
I was going to say, I think that's probably a good idea.
Invite the chairman as well.
Councillor Gates can find her pink worksite boots. Oh, what, your feet have grown? There you go. We can all hold out hope that eventually we'll be as tall as Mark Hamill. So, all right. Did you want to add something, Nick? Sorry.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I think just a quick comment. It's apparent that obviously the councillors would like some more information or some more engagement around the sites on the register, the mapping, and also the development implications or the broader implications around those different sites. And I think to Anne or Jemima, a question from me is whether, and I think that's what you were saying before, Jemima, is that whether we can continue down this process in endorsing these recommendations, and that work can happen concurrently, or whether we need to do some more work on that just to determine whether all of that sort of engagement that we want to undertake with the councillors can happen concurrently, but also with some safety that we could endorse these recommendations today.
Through the chair, correct. Yes, we'll look into whether this can be done concurrently and what implications it has to any timeframes. Yep.
All right. Any other questions, councillors? All right. Well, I'll cautiously move this. Second by Councillor Young. Suffice to say that I think we probably need some further information between now and full council to satisfy ourselves that this is the right way forward. So, does anyone want to speak for or against? Councillor Vorster.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Only to say that I'll be supporting the recommendation in good faith. I'm waiting on that further information concerning the Green Heart, but we'll have an open and persuadable mind at full council. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Anyone else want to speak for or against? All right, take the vote. All in favour? Against? Carried. All right, Councillor Gates, you had a question on this one? Oh, hang on, hold the phone. Councillor Young is going to go and get Councillor Young. Shall we bring the meeting back to order, councillors? Now, Councillor Gates, you had a question on this one?
No, I had a declaration, Chairman.
Right, but we've dealt with that and you're staying?
Yes.
We've done it.
Does Wodge get his release?
Didn't we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Councillor,
I didn't have a question.
okay, sorry. Councillor Peter Young?
Thanks, Chairman. It's not specific to this, the content of this, but the broader subject of the possible future athletes' village. And I wondered about if there's been any investigation or if there will be.
Southport or
We're on the, this is,
I'm on 6.7.
so many PDAs, sorry, we haven't quite got that far.
Sorry,
We're at
Chairman.
We're at 6.6.
Okay, well, that's my preamble for 6.7.
So not specifically related to this item, just a broad question. Councillor Owen Jones.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Specifically related to this item, on page 404, in the summary, it talks about raising the governance position from a secondary role to a primary role through the centralisation of the major Gold Coast City Council administration functions in Southport. And I just think that we should remove reference to that project because that is maybe getting way ahead of ourselves. And so I think as councillors we all know that we've got a new city CEO who is definitely looking into the administrative needs of the city, and part of that project, as we all know, is accommodation. And I think I think it's wrong to make it self-fulfilling that Southport is the preferred location, and if a need is moved for accommodation, movement is required. So I think it's actually misleading to have it referenced, and I think that it shouldn't be.
So I think the only problem we've got is that that's part of the consultant's report.
Through the chair, that is correct, but it is still a draft consultant report, so we can make that change. You will note in the actual body of the agenda item, we have toned that down slightly to say there needs to be a major presence of governance, be it state or local, in the CBD.
Do we want to just add a 4 there? Oh, sorry, maybe we'll put it in a new 3. Just bump 3 to 4.
Through the chair, Councillor Gates, that's a very good observation. There is actually the report talks to the need to looking for federal courthouses, but it's also what other federal facilities could be opportune for the CBD as well.
So maybe we say that Councillor Owen Jones, maybe we just say that editorial amendments be made to the consultant report prior to its public release, reflecting the content of the officer report, which supports broad government presence being increased in the Southport CBD. You happy with that, Catherine? Now, obviously, that's particularly in the summary, but I don't know if that's referred to in other parts of the consultant's report. But maybe just check.
We will.
These things have a habit of getting copied and pasted and then put into other.
And then a little bit later down the track, we're reminded that we've read it
That's
4
right.
times.
Yeah. The heritage team will remind us. I'll be like, oh, this has been here 3 times.
Maybe 4.
Maybe 4. So, Councillor Owen Jones, are you happy with something along those lines?
I am. I'm not opposed to it. I'm opposed to the self-fulfilling prophecy that it becomes.
Yeah, well, what happens is these things become, that someone leans into it very heavily as being the reason, because a consultant's report suggested it in 2022.
Yeah.
So. All right, any other? Councillor Vorsa?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Just on page 405 again, could I just get a sense of the opportunities that are listed there, in particular the formation of a business attraction strategy to grow the existing media and telecommunications sector, to the development of a specialised focus of health for the Gold Coast CBD that does not compete directly with the Gold Coast Health and Knowledge Precinct. This could be in the areas of plastic surgery, day surgery, ear, nose and throat specialists or other growing areas of health. So with that second bullet point, does that mean to say that we don't want those specialists in the CBD, or that we do want those specialists in the CBD because they don't have a footprint in the Health and Knowledge Precinct?
Through the chair. Yeah, so there's already, with the removal of the hospital out of Southport, there were a range of existing specialist health providers that remained in Southport, and this is just identifying an opportunity to build on those health providers that are there to encourage more to locate in that area. So it's just recognising opportunities, and that's also contextual for looking at a CBD, how it performs against other CBDs nationally and in the region, around things like government services as well. So they're just highlighting as a current state analysis of the CBD where the opportunities in their eyes sit.
So, Mr. Chairman, through you, I just want to get a bit of clarity, potentially through you, Mr. Chairman, to the new director or to the team. A decision was made to politically recognise the Southport CBD as the Gold Coast CBD, right? Great. I don't oppose that. As far as I'm concerned, Southport can keep its watch house. But I can't help but feel that in the last little while, other successive council plans and strategies have somewhat unpicked that goal. So, for example, the transport strategy that we've recently put out to community consultation aspires to create a city with multiple nodes where people will recreate, study, access services and employment opportunities outside of a CBD area but closer to where they happen to be living. I take it when I challenged the former director on this, that transport strategy kind of unpicked the grand ambition of all roads leading to Southport. Could I just get a sense from a very high level or a governance point of view or from an ELT perspective, is the intention to deliver a CBD for the Gold Coast where economic activity and employee footfall on footpaths is concentrated, or are we attempting to spread that economic activity across these other hubs, nodes, whatever you want to call it, throughout the city? And I'm asking that because there are some very heavy-hitting projects and suggestions in this list of opportunities that seem to conflict with the direction I thought we were heading in.
Through you, Mr Chair, I can't speak to what's been discussed at ELT recently, but I think more broadly from an economic development perspective, there's a great opportunity to be able to establish different economic nodes around the city with specific purposes. And a CBD type node, which Catherine and Richard can talk to, is more around those sorts of professional services, legal services, and the sorts of activities that are outlined in this report. So from my point of view, there's still a lot of merit in focusing on different nodes around the city and the different functions that they perform from an economic perspective, but Southport as a CBD has a specific role to play in terms of those sorts of professional services and the broader sort of economic opportunities that can be attracted to a CBD.
Thanks. Look, I asked such a broad question that I probably didn't get the answer I was looking for, but that's my fault. Certainly not a reflection on your response. So that's still unanswered for me.
Perhaps can we go to Richard? I mean, the scheme is self-evident on this, insofar as we identify a multitude of centres of differing levels across the city, and the nature of the lineal city that we have always had a centres strategy and a centres hierarchy, where Southport, being the CBD, has been identified as playing a role, but that doesn't mean to say that that's at the expense of nuking Robina to become of no consequence, or Kumara to be of no consequence, or Coolangatta to be of no consequence. So I don't think it's an all or nothing, and I think it would be a bad transport strategy if we only directed all roads to Southport, I've got to say.
So, Mr Chairman, I think you and I are in furious agreement, but this isn't just about what planning outcomes we might like to support. It's actually about council intervention to secure particular uses and tenants and economic activity. So it goes beyond what I would say is a planning matter, but one that strays into an economic development matter. And to the extent that we're intervening to secure an additional university campus, to expand existing media and potentially attract new telecommunication sectors, I just wondered how that economic push, rather than land use and planning push, interacted with other plans, most notably our transport strategy, because I would have thought that the better approach would be for the market to find a home for these places in the areas where we determine they may be suitable, right? Does that kind of make sense? Maybe not.
But obviously, if we contemplate a land use, then we cater for it in the city plan. We allocate that space and that many square metres for future residential, future commercial.
Yeah. So I'm all happy with that. So I'm happy with accommodating multiple universities right throughout the Gold Coast. But this goes more than allocating space for a university. It's actually the recommendation in the consultant's report is to initiate a strategy to attract a university campus to the Gold Coast CBD. So I suppose my question is, in the officer's report and in the recommendations, are we going to see a body of work unfold where we are asked to initiate a strategy to attract a university? Like, does that give...
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Through the chair. There's a range of initiatives identified here. Again, this is the first pass body of work, which is the current state analysis. So what the consultants were looking at is, based on the city as it currently stands, how is Southport performing across multiple sectors? And then out of that, they've looked at, okay, what do you typically see in CBDs that are thriving, and actually identified, based on the environmental scan that they've undertaken, recommended steps that could be followed to move Southport to its ultimate intent of being the Gold Coast CBD. Now, the reason they look at these sorts of things is because it's an Economic Development Act planning instrument. There are three components to the development scheme. The first component is the land use plan, the second component is the infrastructure plan, and the third component is the implementation strategy, which is all the things that need to be done to support the intent of the CBD. So we're looking at all components of the development scheme. We're reviewing all components of the development scheme, and these are early state like options and things that have been identified by the consultants for consideration. we still have a long way to go in terms of the next steps we follow for engagement with the community, engagement with business, and then ultimately reviewing and updating the development scheme. So this is just the very first initial body of work. Typically in CBDs, governments underwrite risk on a whole lot of things because you need to get development happening. And what we've seen between, I guess, where the city's developed at the moment is that there hasn't been a lot of new commercial space delivered in the Gold Coast CBD over the last decade. It's been in other parts of the city, and that's for various reasons. But also Brisbane has taken the lion's share of development from the region. And so even with our body of work just recently, we've identified that all of the professional service space in Southport doesn't even fill up 1 William Street. So one tower in Brisbane has more commercial space for professional services than all of the Gold Coast CBD. And when you look regionally along Maroochydore, Ipswich, Gold Coast, we're actually probably meant to be the second biggest CBD in the region. And then you think, well, one tower in Brisbane, one tower is bigger than all of the space in Southport, which arguably is the second largest CBD in the region. So there's a lot of work to do to actually say, well, for the population that we're supposed to be serving, for the region that we serve, there's significant opportunity still sitting in Southport to provide services and business and employment opportunities for the region. But what's needed is de-risking. So that's the big issue, is how do you de-risk it for the market to be able to deliver that space and to create that momentum there. So this report highlights, where we're stayed at the moment, opportunities for further consideration. They're just opportunities that can be considered, and there's still a long way to go in this work.
Yeah, look, thanks, Mr. Chairman. And look, Richard, I totally get that. I absolutely totally get that. But where I've got a level of discomfort is that we've got a transport strategy and even our economic strategy that we've kind of endorsed. For me, those sorts of pushes and initiatives, the economic stuff, that should find a natural home in the economic strategy. And the economic strategy should say we want to deliver a vibrant CBD that's delivering high-grade commercial space that supports high-paying local jobs and great footfall to support retail businesses so that we've got a vibrant streetscape that leads into a vibrant nighttime economy. For me, the economic strategy is the natural home for those initiatives and not this document. I just feel that we've got initiatives living in two places. So it becomes difficult to performance manage and it becomes difficult to track success. I'm also pretty concerned that I think if we apply for that, future agenda reports be brought forward to Planning and Environment Committee for consideration of findings from early stakeholder engagement and investigations, that we might not, as a council or committee, provide a check and balance before investigations are pursued that might take us down quite a way down the path in attracting new universities and what have you. That's a little bit of a concern. And just lastly, I want to flag this. We can have the best CBD plan ever, but just on the point of attracting government services, the federal government is consolidating all of its Services Australia employees across the Gold Coast to a purpose-built building in Robina, which is presently under construction, right? It's building at Robina. If you have a look at this report, which is non-confidential, right? This particular one?
Yep.
The TAFE, we're losing the TAFE as a future impact out of Southport, losing the TAFE. It's a risk, right? Well, guess where the state government's just built a new TAFE? It's built it at Robina. And I'm not turning this into a Southport versus Robina thing, but I just want to make this point. A lot of the time, the state government and the federal government, when they are putting out EOIs to the market to deliver these developments, are actually requiring the developments to be situated along the heavy rail corridor, not the light rail corridor. So we can have a great plan and we can throw lots of money at the problem of revitalising Southport. But I think unless we've actually nailed a position with the state government and the federal government to support the CBD, we're going to be developing a plan that will actually never yield development on the ground. And it could be that we have a catalyst type development that might induce them to give Southport a go. It could be. But I think unless we've got a commitment early on from them that they're willing to entertain that in future EOIs, we're going to be incurring a lot of expense. We're going to be raising community expectation for the future of Southport without actually being able to attract the dollars, because presently they're focused only on the heavy rail. And just to support that claim, with the Varsity Lakes transit orientated development, so this is where the heavy rail station is, the state government intended to develop that TOD ahead of the Commonwealth Games in 2018, and the plan was to put a university there. Why? Because it's on the heavy rail station. So I just want to flag, unless we've got the state government on board with a lot of this early on, I don't think we should be going down and spending too many resources pursuing investigations and plans. Thanks.
Councillor Gates and Councillor Hamill.
Thanks, Chairman. I too have a concern post-COVID about, and I wonder if the officers have taken it into consideration. I know that the report was probably done over that time, but my understanding is that there's possibly less incentive now for the development of commercial office space, and that the work from home thing has really taken flight for many, many organisations. I worry that the decision we took on Southport becoming a CBD, it's going to be difficult to deliver, in my view. There was a time when the planning scheme was, I think Councillor Young will remember this, was about to recognise 3 key regional centres, and it was Kumara, Robina and Southport. Yep. And that was so that we didn't have a specific CBD and that all of the traffic and all of the people headed for the one spot, but it was decentralised to a degree to allow people to work closer to their homes in one of 3 possible key regional centres. And that's probably maybe 12 or 13 years ago that model was spoken of. And for me, it seems to me that the advent of COVID has perhaps revived that sort of position rather than focusing all of the resources into one specific area where people are seemingly more inclined to only work part-time out of a specific office space, so the space required is far less. So I'm wondering how the officers are contemplating those issues, and if they are valid.
Through the chair, yes, they are valid concerns. Completely acknowledge how the use of office space has changed during and after COVID. In terms of what we're trying to do from a city planning branch perspective is we have 3 large projects underway at the moment. We have the Robina PDA review, we have the Robina agreement review. We also have the Southport PDA review, and we also have Productive Gold Coast. What we are seeing from those bodies of work is that as a council, there's an opportunity to actually position these locations to win, and that they don't need to compete with each other. So what we're looking to do as an outcome from this work that we're presenting to you today is to actually do a strategic visioning exercise with yourself and the community to look at, well, what is the Southport PDA? The options that the consultants have listed are just that, they are options. It doesn't mean that council has to pursue all of them, but it's about picking those ones that we think are actual wins on the board that we can support and seek state and federal government support to actually fulfil the vision of the Southport PDA to be a CBD for the Gold Coast.
Thank you.
Councillor Hamill, then Councillor Owen-Jones and Councillor Peter Young.
Mr Chair, I'm interested in, and I didn't read this report in great detail, but could officers reflect for me that I don't think calling it CBD or otherwise isn't too consequential. It's been that there's been too big a focus on thinking that we needed more office space there when successful CBDs or big city spaces, it's based on how many people live there. Brisbane Metro has a population of about 2.3 million people, I think. Like, it's about how many people live there, not how many people are attracting an office space. So was there much from the consultants or much review on the fact that maybe the bigger part of why Southport isn't kicking off is the fact that we've been too far the narrative of needing federal courts and more office space and whatnot, instead of focusing on getting more residential product into Southport?
Through the chair, we did actually look at that, and what we can report is that the residential side of the PDA is actually performing extremely well. Since it commenced in 2014, we've actually had 6,000 new residents move to that location, which indicates that there are people that are wanting to live in the PDA, or be it for education or for work or for the lifestyle. So in terms of the residential development, it is actually being delivered as we thought it should be.
Which is perfect. So if that's the main win we are having with it, should that be where more of our focus is of how we can improve on that outcome and see more of that kind of growth?
Well, I think that side of it is already facilitated in the development scheme. So, that's not, I guess, if we're looking at the overall how the CBD is performing and how the development scheme is performing, I would argue that it's been performing well in that space. It's the commercial side and the other services side, which is what's been recognised by the consultants here in doing a current state analysis, is that typically with CBDs, if you are looking to satisfy what would be the primary centre, not a secondary or tertiary centre, then you need to do some work to actually attract those type of tenants and those types of businesses and those types of services to the CBD. Previous work we've done looking at what's tipping the dial to actually get development to happen in the CBD is that typically on the Gold Coast, we're a very big small business city. And so typically with small businesses, that's about 90% of businesses have less than 20 staff. And so if you're looking at a developer making a decision to deliver commercial office space, they actually usually chase at least, I think, about 60% pre-commitments to then deliver the building. Now, what we find on the Gold Coast is we don't have a lot of large tenants to underwrite risk to deliver large office spaces. QIC obviously has attracted a major tenant down in Robina, and Robina Land Corp, when they built the Rocket, that was a pretty big spec build, so they attracted a lot of tenants as they delivered it. So that's been the issue, is that if you want to see new commercial space in the CBD, it's actually looking at the market circumstances, how you attract the investment there and how you underwrite risk to deliver that space. That's fundamentally the planning instrument is one component, but there's also then how do you facilitate and achieve those developments. And that's where, if you look at Brisbane, again, different services underwrite risk, and lots of developments have occurred in that city where risk has been underwritten.
So, Mr. Chair, just a point that Richard made before about the one tower in Brisbane, but I think you'll actually find that, so Zupp's Property Group have got significant investments in Southport, but also significant investments in land up in Yatala. I think you'll even find that they have more office space under construction and committed in their Yatala development than what they do in their Southport development, because for that exact reason that the size of companies that need those professional services and that kind of office space are up the north end of the city. They're not down here, just out of that. But I think in terms of GFA of 5-star office space they're putting more into the edge of the industrial area to service that precinct than they are into Southport.
So, I mean, imagine if that zoning didn't allow that to occur and then they were directed to the CBD, But, I mean, I guess that's the driver behind this, is to create a critical mass of activity in the one location.
But that comes back to a couple of points about letting the private sector drive it. So that was Zupp's Property Group's original plan, was more office space in Southport, and that's why they purchased certain sites. But then the feedback they got from private sector was that we want to be closer to where our companies are, which was in Yatala, which led them to buy land, get innovation zoning on it, and deliver office space up there. So again, like, we can have the political push for a CBD, but industry is telling us currently we'd prefer to be up there near where the actual companies are, where our employees are.
I was going to get ready to move it if that's okay, but
Thanks. A couple of questions. One was through you in relation to that population growth that you mentioned in the Southport PDA. Is that reflected in, is that actual population growth, or are you talking about residential dwellings?
So that is ABS data. Admittedly, it's from last year, but it is the ABS data that's used on new residents to the area. It does also, I must say that it also does take into account Southport North and South, which isn't exclusively the Southport PDA, but it is still a good indicator of what has been occurring in the area.
Okay, thanks. So my first question was going to be in relation to the SEQ regional plan. How does that recognise Southport currently?
Through the chair, through the regional plan, the Southport PDA is recognised as one of the city's primary centres. It does still talk to the fact that Robina plays a significant role for the Gold Coast as well, but that the majority of those significant services should be located within the Southport CBD.
And I suppose the investment by the state in the light rail is a recognition of that over a period of time.
Councillor Jones, do you want to move it?
Yes, thanks.
Okay, someone like to second it? Second by Councillor Peter Young. Do you want to speak to it?
I do, and I appreciate those editorial amendment changes because I think that it is important that that it isn't seen as a fait accompli that the City of Gold Coast would move an administration to Southport. I don't think we need to highlight that because if that is a decision of a future council, it really doesn't matter where in the city it goes. It'll be a well thought out decision that we make. Southport PDA is a priority development area that was established in 2013, and it's more than appropriate that we review it at this point in time because a lot's happened in the last 10 years. And one of those things is in regards to the commercial market, we've gone from 22% vacancy down to around 10% vacancy, which is the lowest it's been since the GFC. But I think that the impact of COVID shouldn't be lost on anybody, and what a future city CBD looks like is a really useful thing for us to go out and do some consultation around. And clearly since the PDA was established in 2013, we've also seen the connection of the Southport area to the heavy rail line through stage 2 of the light rail, and hopefully in the next 4 or 5 years we'll see the extension of the light rail south past where it currently terminates at Broadbeach. So I think the nature of how people are moving in our city is definitely changed. And then I think that we should never lose sight of the fact that whilst the Gold Coast may be the second largest site, as you've said, Richard, the very fact that 1 William Street has got more office space than all of the Gold Coast shouldn't be lost on us either. We're a pretty unique city, and the fact that I think that we're the only city in Australia that has a whole lot of high-rises that aren't involved in commercial enterprise, they're involved in accommodation and residential. So I think that a review of the PDA is definitely the right thing to do, but I just don't think we need to get too excited about the commercial aspects of it.
Anyone else want to speak for or against? All right, you happy with that to be closed? Take the vote. All in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you.
Yes, now.
Peter had a question.
I'm ready for a question on 6.7.
Oh, here's one we prepared earlier. 6.7.
Question is just in regard to the city's investment in its optic fibre infrastructure, and I wonder if we're looking at expanding that into Robina, noting the possibility of this kind of significant investment. in the future.
Apologies, I'm not across our optic fibre investment. I don't know if Nick maybe can answer that one.
Councillor Vorster?
Not a question, but I'm happy to move it with a slight recommendation, Mr. Chairman.
And what's the slight change?
Would be to alter 2C so that it read that the state government commit to undertaking comprehensive community consultation regarding the development outcome and legacy opportunity for the site.
Sorry.
Can I go and get a letter off my desk that I might table for distribution?
I think it was circulated to us, Councillor
I
Gates.
asked for it to be, but I never saw it circulated.
It was circulated.
Okay, thank
Yep.
you.
And thank you for doing that. And it might make sense to have that included in the minutes.
Yeah, sorry, Chairman, it was a letter that I wrote as acting mayor, to which I received a response, and I wasn't certain that it had been distributed.
Yeah.
Right.
Page 450, Councillor Gates, just check it's the same one.
So distributed.
Yes, but the response has come, which is what I was referring to,
okay.
that I asked to be distributed, the response.
And then after the site, if we could just insert
The response.
Yeah, go and grab it.
And then just after site, if we could put in brackets, and any related plan of development, capital P, capital O, capital D, close bracket, and then to add a D that reads, and bear with me all, that the state government deliver or provide funding towards those transport infrastructure projects in the prevailing LGIP that may relate to or conflict with the preparation or operation of the Brisbane 2032 Olympic Games. And that's a really key point for us, Mr. Chairman. So if there's a second, I'd be happy to explain the...
I just want to reflect on that D, because obviously we can't bind the state government to do that.
No, and that's...
So the only action that paragraph calls on is the state to do that.
But what it does, Mr. Chairman, is it is connected with the start of the paragraph, which says that the mayor write to the premier, blah, 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 to advocate. So it's basically asking the mayor in his role as the city's advocate to advocate for this as an outcome, but doesn't make it a condition. It acknowledges the fact that they're ultimately the decision maker, but if we don't ask and make the case that I hope to, then we won't receive.
Okay, that's good. Seconded by Councillor Petty. Then just in relation to point C, where we say the development outcome and any opportunity, blah, 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 and any related plan of development. Now, do you think, Richard, that would... I mean, I think it's probably more likely they might still put a PDA over the area. Do you think that would be a possibility?
Through the chair, we're obviously undertaking a planning review at Robina at the moment, and we haven't actually reached a position of, based on our vision work and engagement with community and stakeholders, what might be the right instrument over that area. The state have identified, based on our timing estimates at the moment, about 2025, 26 for their detailed planning. So it's highly likely that we'll have completed our planning work and identified a potential future for this area. As to whether or not, they then cut out a piece and put a PDA or other regulatory instrument on it, doesn't necessarily have to be a PDA. I don't know the answer to that.
So I just wonder whether we should say any related plan of development or planning instrument.
Yeah, any related, planning instrument.
I think that's key for good reason, Mr. Chairman, and when it's time for debate, I'm happy to open and explain.
Councillor Gates, how'd you go with your correspondence?
Would you like me to read it too?
Yes.
Okay, it's very brief. It says, thank you for your letter. The review about the Robina Central Planning Review. The review will play a key role in developing the long-term vision for Robina Central. As you noted, Robina will be the location for the second Olympic Village, accommodating up to 2,600 athletes and officials and providing a legacy of around 500 permanent dwellings. This Olympic Village will help deliver much-needed housing supply to one of Australia's fastest-growing regions and contribute to the vibrancy of a mixed-use Robina town centre. The dwellings required for this Olympic Village are only a small part of a much larger urban development with significant ongoing investment from the private sector. I note you will be in contact again when further information is available on the proposed planning instrument for Robina Central. In the interim, Dr Stephen Miles has been copied for his information because he's the Minister assisting the Premier on Olympics infrastructure. The Premier's government looks forward to continuing engagement with the Gold Coast City Council as the review progresses.
So, Mr Chairman, if I could perhaps open and say thank you for that, and it's good to have the Premier on record. I mean, I must admit, the Premier's undertakings in that letter are quite at odds with what QIC, who own the land and who will deliver the project, have said to me. They have indicated to me that they're not quite settled on what the development outcomes might be, and it could be that we don't end up with 500 dwellings that people can purchase to live in or necessarily rent. Could be aged care, which I'd actually welcome. So I think there's a little bit of, I don't think QIC and the Premier are necessarily on the same page, but the reason why I wanted to modify C is because if you have a look at the mapped area of the proposed footprint for the Games Village, you will see it is much, 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 much more expansive than just the 4 towers that are proposed for the village. And my worry is that, if we could bring it up. Thank you very much for bringing that up. If we talk about delivering 500 dwellings, we might all be quite relaxed about that as an outcome for an area so close to Robina Town Centre and services. But it could be that in 2025 or 2026, what the state government actually do is they lodge a POD or use some other planning instrument that governs development throughout that entire nearly 10-hectare site. So if we don't performance manage the state government through the Athletes Village process, what might end up happening is that the Athletes Village is used as a Trojan horse to secure some other higher development outcomes on the balance of the site to support the state government's principal commercial asset in the precinct, which is Robina Town Centre. So I just want to make sure that when the state do consult, and we're asking them to consult, that we're not narrowing the focus of the consultation to just the 4 towers, but actually expanding it to include the whole site for which they may lodge the POD. Because a narrow interpretation of our ask might be that the community is consulted on the colour scheme for the 4 towers, but the state gets to do whatever they want on the balance. And it's important that we do that or take that opportunity because the current legislation doesn't provide for any community feedback or any public submissions. So that's the purpose of that first amendment. Mr Chairman, and then the second, which is that Part D. I just want to flag that city officers still have some unanswered questions around the infrastructure capacity in the area, which will be answered through this Robina Central Planning Review. But if you have a look at the LGIP that we've endorsed, it's gone out to community consultation and will be returned to us. There are a number of multi-million-dollar road projects which are, in my view, required today, including the Laver Drive Robina Parkway intersection, which is mooted at a $35 million cost, that's actually planned to be delivered in 2031. So I reckon the need is there today, but even if you say that the need's not there today, we've all agreed that the need will be there in 2031. What's the likelihood of the state government permitting us to deliver an infrastructure project of that scale within a stone's throw of their village within months of the Olympic Games? I would say it's going to be 0. So to the extent that there may be a conflict with delivering these infrastructure projects around 2031, around Robina, I think we should be making the case to the state government that they should be supporting the bringing forward of those projects so that we deliver the LGIP need while not conflicting with their games. Because, Mr. Chairman, the Rocket intersection was 2 weeks from breaking ground for redesign and upgrade, 2 weeks. And this council had to pull the pin on that project and redesign it. It should have been delivered 3 years ago. And we're only going to break ground at the end of this financial year because of the Olympic Games. I don't want us to be in a position where our infrastructure projects and our budgeting is blown out of the water because we've had to delay it to overcome the Olympic Games, where the state government can and should be bringing them forward in partnership with us. And that's the purpose of D.
Through you, Mr. Chair. The 2031 you spoke of, Councillor Vorster, is that from the LGIP 2 program? Isn't that a 5-year cohort period ending in 2031?
It is, but having spoken with city officers, we've got a pipeline of upgrades that need to happen before that, and I'm told that it's 2031.
Okay, thank you.
And it's on that basis, I think. And besides the fact that they're the ones inducing all of the traffic into the area.
Yeah, I got no doubt that we should plan it out. I suppose I was just interested if the 2031 was the date that you thought they were constructing or the end of the 5-year cohort period.
Yeah, so we've presently, or prior to the council endorsement of the budget, we actually had no money to progress even looking at a design for that $35 million upgrade. But the council, in its wisdom, and I'm very grateful to it, allocated $500,000 to accelerate the design work of that intersection, precisely so that we could ask the state government to make a contribution.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Gates.
Thanks, Chairman. In noting that the Premier's response to our correspondence suggested that the government looks forward to continuing engagement with the Gold Coast City Council as the Robina Central Review proceeds, I'm just asking through you to the officers if there has been any engagement with the government and how that process is going to proceed, which requires their participation.
Yep, through the chair, we certainly have been engaging with the government. So most recently, I think it was Tuesday, we had a meeting with them, and that's with multiple state entities. So the state entities that look after legislation, as well as the regional planning team, as like the state office for regional planning. And the purpose of those meetings is really just to clarify who our lead point of contact will be in the state and how they'll coordinate the various state interests that would have an interest in Robina. Obviously, there's some large state assets there, as well as entities like Main Roads, Transport and Main Roads, those entities as well. So that's all going really well.
So it sounds like the officers are totally across it. I have an SEQ regional planning workshop tomorrow with all of the mayors of South East Queensland, and I was thinking there would be an opportunity in emerging issues to raise any issue that we may have if it wasn't being already addressed, but it sounds to me like it's in hand and we're in good shape. Yes.
First trip to the Big Smoke in this new role. So
lucky Nick.
Best of luck.
Lucky Donna.
Lucky Donna, 3 o'clock on a
So I
Friday.
don't have my local law meeting rules handy, but I think we'll table the correspondence from the Premier.
Sure.
And that can be included in the minutes. So if you can just make sure that a copy gets to the
will do.
officers after. All right, any other questions? Otherwise, you happy with that, Councillor Vorster? So moved by Councillor Vorster, I think, seconded by Councillor Young. We'll take the vote. All in favour? Against? Carried. All right, now I think that's the end of the listed items. Any items of general business? Councillor McDonald?
Thank you, Mr.
Since
Chair.
you had a little bit of a glitter in your, just a little bit of sparkle in the hand up there.
I was just wondering if there's an opportunity for the officers to give us a bit of a talk on what's happening with amendments 2 and 3, seeing it's been since the beginning of the year and there's been a couple of extensions and the state government seemed to be delaying. and I'm just wondering what the latest is. And I'm sure that, I'm getting asked questions about it.
Yeah, I mean, look, we all are, and there's a housing crisis that's looming, if not already here. I think people are expecting action from the state government. So, Richard, do you want to deal with that now, or should we deal with it after the meeting?
We can do it after the meeting.
Yeah, I thought you might say that. So we'll just deal with that at the conclusion of the meeting. Councillor Vorster.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Look, just for the sake of completeness, I just want to flag with all councillors who participate in the heritage, and we're talking about Green Heart, the drains on the Green Heart were actually mentioned on page 14 of the master plan, and there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 very slender drains across the site. So the Lifestyle and Community Director will reach out to the heritage team who were involved in the development of the master plan, just to make sure that we are properly mapping those assets and not necessarily casting an extremely wide net.
Okay.
So I just want to thank the heritage team who were across it, but also the Lifestyle team who were across it. Thanks.
Probably in the middle of a floodplain, the 5 slender drains were a bit ambitious to to deal with the water flow. But anyway, all right. Any other general business? Otherwise, we'll close the meeting at 11:23. And if we can just